Welcome to DM of the Mists, covering all things CoS Strahd and Ravenloft. I teased this one for a while and here it is, my video all about Strahd, resources, role-playing him, and some miscellaneous stuff as well. I won't be talking about combat in this video, I know that's shocking, but the only reason I'm not talking about combat in this video is because I've covered it in another video. I did a video where I talked about the final battle, covering all the Tarokka locations in Castle Ravenloft. So that's the video to go to if you want to learn how to run Strahd in combat. This kind of covers all the rest of the stuff. If you watch this video and find that I've not covered something you were expecting, please let me know in the comments. It could be useful for other people and could even make me think, oh, I'll cover that in a follow-up video. Going to be covering the following: resources for sort of learning about Strahd and getting in his head, and how to roleplay Strahd. Those two things are probably going to be what I spend most of my time on. And then the following more briefly: how and when to intro Strahd, his charm ability, Strahd being a wizard, Strahd being a general, how to make Strahd scary, the dinner in terms of the sort of fan mod, not the rules as written version of the dinner, Vasili, the Vasili's disguise, and one or two more things beyond that. Before we go on, minor spoilers, aside from the obvious CoS Strahd, is The Legend of Vox Machina. That's the Amazon show based on the Critical Role campaign. Netflix Castlevania show. And bringing it back to D&D, Lost Mine of Phandelver and Phandelver, and Below the Shattered Obelisk. There's minor spoilers for all of those. So, let's talk about Strahd von Zarovich. Or is it Strahd von Zarovich? You might have heard me bounce between the two pronunciations in my videos. Technically, officially, it's both. In the Dungeon Master's Guide 2024, there's a lore glossary section. They talk about Strahd. They've got little pronunciation things next to the different people and places they talk about, and both are accepted. I think they've done this because over the years, there's been different pronunciations. I think Zarovich was used in Strahd, the audiobook, and then newer audiobooks and newer things, they say Zarovich. So it's okay to use whichever one you want. Let's talk about resources. The first obvious one, which seems almost silly to say, is CoS Strahd. There's a great chapter right at the beginning talking about Strahd, who he is, his story, his goals. I suggest not just obviously reading that first of all, but almost rereading it while you're doing the campaign. It's what I used to do. Kind of just sort of reminds you of his goals and things like that. And don't forget as well, his appendix section has additional stuff as well. Stuff about his tactics, his minions, the Heart of Sorrow, and more. It's very easy to just think, oh, all the Strahd info is in chapter 1 and forget about the appendix stuff. Tome of Strahd is pretty handy to read as well. Just, I know it's only short, the excerpt in that, just because it's kind of his story in his own words as well. There's also Van Richten's Guide. I wouldn't say this is essential. It doesn't really offer much more than what's in CoS Strahd about Strahd. There's obviously the stuff tying into the two factions they introduced in Van Richten's Guide, the Olmist Inquisition and the Priests of Ozzibus. I can never remember how to pronounce this. But, you know, it's not essential reading for CoS Strahd. We have the horrors within the newly announced Ravenloft product coming out in June. I'm very excited. Probably the next video after this one is going to be talking about it. And there are promo images that show a write-up for Strahd. Again, doesn't seem to offer anything new, but it only shows 2 pages, so there could be more on later pages or something new in addition. I think the idea of both that and Van Richten's Guide are for people who want to run Ravenloft, but not necessarily CoS Strahd. At least they've got the info on Barovia and Strahd. I mentioned this in a recent video. He appears very briefly in one of the Ravenloft Mist Hunters modules, number 5, Unexpected Hospitality. It's a brief cameo. I'd probably say it's not worth it unless you really want to see what it's like, or you manage to get it cheap in a sale. I think there's a sale going on at the moment where it's a few dollars off. There's the novels. Strahd Memoirs of a Vampire. I talked about this recently in the Ask Me Anything Let's Chat Ravenloft I did, where somebody said, is it required reading? And I said, well, no, maybe not required reading. I'd say it's recommended reading. It's pretty helpful. And then also Strahd 2, the sequel, The War Against Azalin, Vampire of the Mists, Night of the Black Rose, Heir of Strahd, and Escape from Castle Ravenloft all feature Strahd pretty heavily. However, I'd say probably my favorite fan-made resource on Strahd. It's an old resource, and there was a post where somebody was asking about resources for Strahd recently on, I think it was the CoS Strahd subreddit, and this didn't get like sort of shouted as much as I was expecting, and I always historically used to see it as like the number 1 resource and be the most highly upvoted. There is a Reddit user called Guild's Bounty, and they, maybe he, but I'll say they just to be safe, did a post called My Notes on Running Strahd Like an Unholy Terror. Now, it starts off by saying, this is wordy, this is long. And I remember when I first saw it, I was like, do I really want to read all this? Please read all of it. It's, again, not essential, but I hugely, hugely recommend it. I was put off by the length, read it, and was glad I read it. If you're put off by the length, please give it a go. I'm sure you won't regret it. Gives a good overview about Strahd and the many facets of who he is and his personality. I like how a lot of it is kind of classic Strahd. Strahd is smart. Strahd is a general. Then there's one later on that Strahd is bored, and you're like, wait, what? Strahd is bored? But it's true, and it's cool how so many different parts of his personality are kind of covered and helps to really get inside his head. There's also a great stages of interest section where it shows how Strahd should treat the PCs as the campaign goes on. In the first stage is aware. He's aware of them. They've just arrived. They exist. Great. His new playthings. Beyond that, there's interested. This might be that they've started to do a couple of things that have piqued his curiosity. And it goes all the way to obliterate. They've done something to offend or upset Strahd. Strahd wants to destroy them and break them. It's easy to miss, but one of the comments as well, because they ran out of room in the post, talks about spell suggestions as well, about if you change up Strahd's spells. Popular mod guide creator Mandy Mod has an Understanding Strahd post. What I liked about this is it kind of talks more about his psychology. And the conclusion she comes to is, you know, there's nothing psychologically wrong with Strahd. He's just a terrible, terrible person, which is great. He's just a very naughty boy and horrible, horrible man. Dragna Carter also has a very long write-up about Strahd, which is great. Another, for those of you, sometimes I talk about things and forget that this might be somebody's first video or someone brand new to Strahd and Curse of Strahd. Dragna Carter as well is a community guide maker, created a popular mod guide called Curse of Strahd Reloaded. And in his write-up for Strahd, he splits Strahd into three sort of roles: the gentleman, the tyrant, and the monster, and they kind of change as the campaign goes on, similar to the stages of interest thing I mentioned a minute ago. And the cool thing that Dragna Carter does is gives media suggestions as well. So if you're trying to roleplay the gentleman, think of these characters from these famous books or movies. I think that's a great way to sort of understand and have something comparative and think, oh, I'm going to watch those or channel those kinds of personalities and people when I run Strahd this way. Another thing I liked about the Dragna Carter write-up was he goes into detail about the relationships between the different locations and peoples of Barovia. I thought that was quite interesting. So his relationships with the different settlements, his relationships with some of the more minor locations, like the Druids and the Berserkers at Yester Hill, things like that. There is a Reddit quips post where somebody did a long list of quotes and quips that Strahd could say and use. Even if you don't use them, I think it's great to sort of read through them to give an idea of the kind of stuff that Strahd could or should say. So I'll include a link to that in the description. And then there's obviously the obvious stuff like Dracula, Nosferatu, and all the stuff that came before that Strahd is based on. It seems silly to mention them, but it also seems silly not to mention them. So have at it with that as well. Right, let's talk about roleplay next, and let's talk about his voice first of all. So it's almost like two schools of thought regarding his accent. Do you give him the sort of classic Dracula, Nosferatu, Romanian style, I want to suck your blood kind of accent? Or do you just make him a very posh-sounding noble? I think both are fine. I don't think there's like a wrong way to do it. I personally like to do the posh-sounding noble and don't give him the Romanian accent, but I know there are some CoS Strahd DMs who do. I'll give you an example of the voice I use. I've got to try and think about it now and channel my inner Strahd. I think he'd be like, welcome to Barovia. I'm Strahd von Zarovich, or Zarovich, depending on your pronunciation. Please, have a seat. That kind of thing where it's polite, but there's almost like a tinge of like boredom, impatience. There's something slightly unsettling going on. Remember to channel, as I mentioned a minute ago, Guild's Bounty, Stages of Interest, Dragna Carter's roles. And the way I played him and those kinds of things suggest as well, always play him as a gentleman and noble. Unless it's near the end game, maybe that's when he loses his cool. A couple of anecdotes from my campaign. I had a bard who, during the dinner one, and I'll talk about the dinner later, wanted to sing him a song and perform for him, and only rolled like something like an 8 on the performance, and he was like, no, oh no. And I had Strahd reply with, how wonderful. So kind of like polite, but obviously he didn't approve. That kind of thing, I think, works well, where even if the players absolutely bore him to tears, he still tries to be polite and a polite nobleman. And then I remember playing him as very rarely getting angry, like always calm and cool and composed. The only time he got angry was towards the end of the final battle, where he absolutely lost it at one of the players for having Sergei's sword, the Sun Sword. So, like, even when it looks like, you know, Strahd is at the obliterate stage, to go back to that stage thing, and he's upset with them and angry, he'll still have this sort of air of fake friendliness about him, even if he wants to tear their heads off. And then when it gets to the point where he's like shouting at the players, that's when hopefully the players will be like, oh, now he's angry with us. Well, this is bad. I remember from my campaign as well, when I ran the dinner, great sort of flavor for his gaslighting is treating and talking about Irina and Tatiana like it's a possession that belongs to him. When he was giving them quests saying that he wants them to bring Irina to him, he was like saying, she belongs to me, she is mine. Not like talking about her as a person, but as an object. And then later on, and I'll include a link to this in the description, I posted it on Reddit, a sort of mini monologue he did before the final battle, where Irina, they managed to convince Irina to go to Castle Ravenloft with them in the final battle. And I think one or two people disguised themselves as Irina as well. And he was just sat by the fireplace because the battle was in the study, and he was like, you bring her here tainted. Like, it's your fault. You know, you've ruined her for me. And it's nothing to do with him. It's not his fault at all. Stuff like that works great, I feel. In terms of inspirations I recommend that probably go different to what a lot of people would do in the wider community. This came out when I was already halfway through running Curse of Strahd, so I didn't use it as a basis. But then when I started watching it, I thought, oh, that's actually a really good match. This is where the Vox Machina spoiler comes in. The villain of the first season is called Lord Silas Briarwood, and he is, quite fittingly, a vampire noble. And he's voiced and played by Matt Mercer, who is obviously the creator of Critical Role. I just thought it was great. I thought he just, like, if you watch that and sort of use that as inspiration for Strahd, I don't think you can go too far wrong. And incidentally as well, funnily enough, Matt Mercer guested as Strahd in an actual play. I'll see if I can dig that out and include a link in the description. He was just brilliant at it. Another good resource, I think, is Dracula, or the depiction of Dracula in the Netflix Castlevania series. Obviously, there's been a gazillion depictions of Dracula over the years, but I really liked the Castlevania one for, and again, spoilers for Netflix Castlevania. In that, he kind of comes across as very sort of bored and tired and frustrated. And I think that whole ties in really well to the whole Strahd is bored angle. I think he's great for that. But that's actually just like 2 suggestions out of so many suggestions. Whenever there's a post on Reddit where someone says like, what inspiration do you use for Strahd? There'll be 1,000,001 different suggestions. So let me know in the comments your suggestions as well, because there's so many different ways to play him. Next up, when and how should you introduce Strahd? I'm not actually going to talk about this here. I'm going to signpost you to another video I've done, I think a year or so ago now, where I talk about how there's a popular way to introduce Strahd, which is Collion's funeral in the village of Barovia, but I prefer a sort of slightly later introduction. So if you want to learn more about that, that's the video to go to. Let's talk about Strahd's charm ability, the classic vampire ability that Strahd has. There's some great suggestions in that Unholy Terror Guide I mentioned earlier. For example, target the Sun Sword holder and say, please, give me your other sword. How can a player refuse, right? Speaking of players, I guess there's the argument of player agency. You know, you're essentially telling the player then you can't do what you would normally do. You can't hit Strahd. You've got to pretend he's your best mate. And it can lead to some really funny roleplay moments. When I was a player of Curse of Strahd, there's a really tough guy, a fellow PC, and he was charmed. And then he was just like, oh, I really like Strahd. Strahd's cool, yeah, kind of thing. I guess you might have a player who would be annoyed that then they can't do their usual player stuff and they've got to be nice and friendly to Strahd. Obviously, hopefully it's something you would have talked about in session 0. If you did a session 0, you probably, you know, it's not a bad idea to do a session 0. But I imagine players would be okay with it, especially because it's kind of expected. It's that classic vampire trope lore thing. If you're concerned, if you have any doubts, my workaround would be to charm an NPC. Maybe the Fated Ally. Maybe some other NPCs who might be involved at the scenario where you're going to use charm. I think that works well because they get to see how charm works. And then they can still do their cool player stuff and they're unaffected. What you might find is then they get to see what Strahd's charm is like, and then the next time a PC is charmed and they're more open to it because they know they can still do some, you know, cool stuff, but they can't, you know, hit Strahd over the head with a sword kind of thing. Let's talk about Strahd as a wizard next. Now, there's one thing I see should really be in one of my Mistakes DMs Make videos, if it's not already. Whenever someone talks about Strahd's access to spells, they say Strahd has access to every spell ever. And the source for that is the Amber Temple Library, where it says that all the spells ever are in the Amber Temple Library. I'm going to sound really nitpicky now. That's not what it says. It says that all wizard spells from the player's handbook are in there. So I only say this because if people want to play it as rules as written as possible and don't want to, go too way overboard with like what they can give Strahd, limit it to wizard spells in the player's handbook. Still gives you an absolute ton of options. And if you're using Strahd's rules as written stat block, he can only cast up to 5th level. So bear that in mind that he wouldn't be able to cast a 6th level or higher spell unless you change that, give him a different stat block or what have you. I'd say that spells he's got in his list are quite varied and versatile. He's got some offensive spells like Fireball, but he's got some that are kind of more like handy for using outside of battle, like Detect Thoughts or Scrying. But when he knows the final battle is coming, you might want to change them around. I think this is talked about in the Unholy Terror Guide, probably lots of places. I remember swapping Detect Thoughts and one of the other spells with Misty Step and Shield. Misty Step because helps getting away from if he's grappled, and Shield because it just helps better protect him and boost his AC. One bit of flavour I liked for Strahd as a wizard, which I did in my game, was I made it look like any spell he cast was absolutely effortless. He spent not just years or decades, probably centuries, mastering being a wizard. I played it that when he cast Fireball, he just flicked his wrist like that and, it was like effortless. Strahd as a general, I probably won't go into too much detail here because I think we've covered this off in other videos, including the combat one. Just remember that he's a general, he's combat savvy, he's smart when it comes to that kind of thing, and he will have tactics. He will know what to do and when to do. It kind of gives DMs the excuse to metagame and know, how to counter things that the players might do. Well, you can argue that if the player's been using different spells and abilities during the campaign, his spies would have found out and fed that back to him anyway. And the fact that he might tailor monsters to fit. A good example here is I know there's some DMs who ban flying PCs from CoS Strahd because they think it's too safe and too easy to avoid things like zombies. But, there's skeletons with bows and arrows. There's wights with bows and arrows. If Strahd learns that if there's a flying PC, he will introduce those kinds of units to make sure that they get hurt. And there's nothing stopping you from giving, maybe not a zombie, but vampire spawn, who just have the sort of ranged attacks, give them a crossbow. How to make Strahd scary. I think the most important thing you can do is let the lore do the talking. I talk about this in my when and how to introduce Strahd video. They go to the village of Barovia and see this miserable village, meet Ismark and Irina, learn of Irina's plight and the fear they have for this nobleman who's obsessed with her, the lord of the land. They see the March of the Dead and see these hundreds, or probably thousands of people in ghostly form parading through the village, then heading to the castle. They go to Circle Encampment to get the card reading from Madame Eva and learn that they've got to find these MacGuffins if they want to have any chance of even defeating him. And then they learn as well from another Vistana about the Mad Mage's uprising and how it failed and how even this really powerful wizard couldn't take down Strahd. They go to Vallaki and see people there terrified of Strahd and worried he may appear at any moment. And then other places beyond that as well. The people of Krezk not wanting to let people in. The ritual being held with the giant Strahd statue in Yester Hill. Stuff like that I think is really good to sort of set up Strahd as this scary villain. And then when you do introduce Strahd, they're like, oh, it's this guy. Whereas if you introduce him early, you can make him scary by punching a level 3 player and knocking them out in one hit. But, the lore doing the talking is another way as well that can be effective. It's essentially you as the DM conveying it through the NPCs that they meet. And you might have a player who's just like, yeah, whatever, he's not going to be that tough. But chances are the more they hear more people saying this guy is scary, it's not guaranteed they'll believe it, but there's higher chances they may. You could set, as I mentioned a minute ago, you set an example early. If not Strahd, then someone in Strahd's place, like Rahadin. If Rahadin one-shots a PC at level 3 and they think, wow, he's tough, they're going to then instinctively think, well, Strahd's going to be even tougher than that because Strahd's the final boss, not Rahadin. Important bit of advice I feel is just make sure you know Strahd's stat block well around any time you're going to introduce him, even before the final battle, but especially during the final battle, just in case there's an unexpected fight. You might have a moment where Strahd meets with the PCs and you think it's just going to be a bit of role play, a bit of talking, and someone starts attacking him, and then you don't want to be caught out thinking, oh gosh, what's Strahd's abilities again? At least have like a sort of quick glance and refresh yourself of what he could do, what spells he might cast and things like that. I'd also argue as well, once they get hold of at least one, if not both, definitely both, but even just one of the sunlight items, there's no more face-to-face Strahd appearances at that point. It's too risky. Strahd could get killed outside of the castle. And if all else fails, you could opt for a tougher stat block. There's the Dragna Carta 3-phase Strahd, or the infamous challenge rating 27 Strahd on the Ems Guild. I'll include links in the description. And I also did a video where I kind of talked about them and a few other alternative Strahd stat blocks in depth. And the Heart of Sorrow. Don't forget the Heart of Sorrow. It's easy to forget that he's got essentially additional 50 HP, and any attack done within that 50 HP just looks like, it's not just vampire regeneration, it looks like it's just invincible. It doesn't even affect him at all. And that's a great way to get the players to think, oh man, we've got to do something before we can even have any chances of defeating this guy. Or maybe that's an incentive for them to think, wow, we definitely need to get this holy symbol of Ravenkind and this Sunsword we keep hearing about. Next up, let's talk about the dinner. So there's two versions of doing the dinner. There's the rules as written version. So in the dining room section of the Castle Ravenloft chapter, it says that it's essentially a trap. Strahd is there as an illusion, disappears, and the drawbridge goes up, all the lights go out. It is a trap. It's intended to be that it triggers the end game. I think it's a cool thing to do, but there are a lot of mod guides and sort of fan-made resources recommend having Strahd invite the PCs for just a regular dinner, like a sort of get to know your enemy, I guess, and both works in both directions, as sort of diplomatic meeting, if you will. I essentially ended up doing both because I did the diplomatic meeting sort of mid-campaign, and then when they went to Castle Ravenloft for the end game, I did the whole thing where he's an illusion, disappears, and the drawbridge goes up. So I got to do both, so had my cake and eat it too. And they were given the invitation when it was a second meeting with Strahd, which was in Vallaki. So he just appeared in Vallaki after all the Baron's efforts to try and make sure he never appears. And he appeared outside the church after they'd returned the bones and thwarted his quest, the Feast of St. Andros thing. Remember that when they travel to Castle Ravenloft, there should be no trouble, no random encounters on the way. The invitation says your passage here will be a safe one. And it helps to show that he's a man of his word. I made a point of it when they arrived, where he said, how was your journey? Did you encounter any trouble on the way? And they were like, no. He's like, well, I did say you wouldn't. Just to sort of really remind them of that. So when I ran the sort of diplomatic version of the dinner, they were given quests. It lined up with the goals in the chapter in CoS Strahd, bring me Irina, find Van Richten, find the Keepers of the Feather. They didn't do any of them, obviously, but, well, I had one player who was tempted because one player really wanted to go home, and Strahd said, if you help me with this, I'll see if I can get you out of Barovia. But important that if they did do all of them, Strahd is probably not going to do that. If you like the idea, I know there's some DMs who don't like Strahd lying, and that is technically lying. He could say something like, oh, I said I'd let you leave Barovia. I never said anything about letting you leave alive. The plan being he would kill them and throw them into the mists. I also, and this isn't an idea I came up with. This is, I don't want to give credit where credit's due. This is whatever wider resources that talk about this kind of stuff. But I had Strahd give a small tour as well. From the dining room, they went into the chapel, up the stairs, then to the audience hall, and then back down. So it was only sort of like 2-ish floors. And it was an opportunity as well in the audience hall to meet the 4 consorts. I put them in there. And it was funny, actually, my players thought it was a trap. They walked in and they saw these vampires spawn. They were like, oh no. But no, Strahd just wanted to introduce them. And it's a great way for sort of knowing then the players know, oh, Strahd's not alone. He's got minions. Well, obviously he's got minions, but he's got some sort of lieutenants and mini bosses as well. And this didn't happen in my campaign, but my players were probably too scared to sort of get on Strahd's bad side. But you do hear stories of PCs who sneak off and have a wander. And Strahd will say something like, you're fine on these floors, but don't go too far up or down into the catacombs. And then obviously if they do, just run it be as brutal as you want, maybe. I'll share some resources in the description. Dragnakart has done a stat block, by which I mean it's just like a resource, but it's styled like a monster stat block. And Lunch Break Heroes' write-up was good, I remember. So I'll include links to those. Vasili von Holtz. This is the disguise Strahd uses if he wants to visit people and not reveal that he is Strahd. I ended up using Vasili sparingly, mostly for the reason that before CoS Strahd I ran Lost Mine of Phandalva, and this is where we get into spoilers for Lost Mine of Phandalva, and then by extension Phandalva and below, Shattered Obelisk. There are doppelgangers in that who disguise themselves as Drow, working for the main villain. So I'd already had someone in disguise kind of antics before, plus you've got Victavio in disguise as well, that I didn't use Vasili that much. I think I had him congratulate Lady Vokta when the coup happened, and it might have been one other time as well, and that was literally it. I've seen some DMs who love the idea of doing Vasili. You could have some great moments when Vasili and Irina fall in love. They tell Vasili a bunch of secrets or give him some of the Tarokka items, and then when they have the reveal and realize it's Strahd all along, they're just like, oh my gosh. And it sounds amazing, the stories you sometimes read and hear. But I know there are some DMs who hate the idea. They think it's above, Strahd is above disguising himself and hanging around with the PCs. I would argue that there's the whole Strahd is bored angle. But yeah, I can kind of see both sides. I do honestly think that the inclusion of Vasili, which was only sparingly in CoS Strahd, it only appears in like the Walk the House letter, Coffin Shop, and Abbott's Appendix info. I think that it's just mostly a nod to Strahd, because in Strahd, the first novel, he disguised himself as Vili to see Levine of Octa, if I've remembered my lore there without it being in my notes. Again, the whole thing of, this ties into the whole question of why doesn't Strahd just take Irina straight away? Strahd is trying something different every time. It's almost like a generations-long Groundhog Day, for those of you familiar with that movie, where each time he tries something different to see if that's the time he can actually win Tatiana. And maybe him disguising himself as Vasili and trying to woo her in a way where he's not obviously Strahd is his plan for this time. And I think that could be a way to do it. And finally, I just wanted to talk some more about the combat final battle thing. More for the fact that I just wanted to make sure there was a bit included in the timestamp so that if someone looks at this video, they think, oh my gosh, it didn't include combat. Like I said, there's a whole other video about that. Although, to be fair, it just covers Castle Ravenloft. It doesn't cover battling Strahd outside of Castle Ravenloft. Maybe that's a part 2 I can do at some point. But another angle I wanted to talk about was a great way for the players to see Strahd's battle tactics in a risk-free environment is a cool guide I saw on Reddit, not posted on the CoS Strahd subreddit, it was posted on one of the regular D&D subreddits, where somebody modified the Mad Mage encounter. And I've talked about this before, I think it was in my homebrew video, where it sort of all plays out in the Mad Mage's head, and you see the battle with Strahd and the Mad Mage happening. The players can't get hurt. The players can try and heal and buff the Mad Mage to try and help him win the fight. And I think that's a really good way of showing the players what Strahd is like. If you want to give sort of clues and inklings of the kind of stuff Strahd can do ahead of time, or if you don't get an opportunity to do it, where Strahd, beats one of them into a pulp when they're at a lower level before they get a sunlight item, that can be a good way to do it. Where, they can see him cast Fireball and Mirror Image on himself and stuff like that. So I'll include a link to that in the description as well, it might be handy. I think we'll leave it there. I hope that was useful. It's one of these videos. I think I'll be honest and transparent now. I didn't want to say this right at the beginning. If you've made it this far, thank you. I delayed this video. I actually started writing notes for it back in January and delayed it because I was scared it wouldn't be good enough. I was scared it wouldn't be helpful enough to people. I don't want to put out fluff videos. I want to put out videos that actually genuinely help people. I think if you're a brand new DM to CoS Strahd, hopefully you've learned a lot today. If you know a lot of Strahd lore already, hopefully I've still taught you one or two things you didn't know. And if you already knew everything, I'm sorry, but hopefully it shows you that you're on the right path and you know all the important stuff and all the stuff you should know. But yeah, I am trying to think of what other videos I've got coming up. The next Ravenloft video will be probably talking about the horrors within. Not just talking about the news, because I know a million places have done that already, but some other stuff I've dug out, some interesting information, and in my predictions and thoughts as well, or what I think Ravenloft fans would want in this book, which I don't know if this book will cover or not. And I talked about this recently in the recent live stream I did, the Ask Me Anything, Let's Chat Ravenloft, where I talked about my thoughts of horrors within and what might be coming up. So if you haven't seen that, I'll be covering it in this video as well. And on the CoS Strahd front, I still need to cover off some NPCs. I said I'd do a video about Babala Saga. I said I'd do a video about the consults, although I'm not sure because I think there's already a lot of resources for the consults already. I don't want to repeat what other people have done as well. I don't want to just add a video when someone's already done that video. So we'll see about that one. And then I guess we'll see what else comes in the future. Please subscribe if you haven't already. I've also got a membership where it's a bit like Patreon, but YouTube's version. You can access videos a bit early. There's some behind the scenes members only videos I do. You get my DMs Guild resources at a discounted price, things like that. Thanks very much for watching.